Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Red-Headed Auctioneer, an honouring audiobook's original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Chapter 1, The Stain on Bond Street. The late autumn fog, thick and yellow, clung to the window panes of our Baker Street lodgings, muffling the usual clamour of London into a distant, spectral hum. It was a day perfectly suited for introspection, or, as was more often the case in our peculiar household, for the quiet, meticulous arrangement of facts by my remarkable friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. He sat opposite me, not with his customary pipe and criminological texts, but with a dissecting needle poised over a particularly offensive specimen of what appeared to be a common housefly, muttering theories concerning its digestive tract. "A fascinating study, Watson," he remarked without glancing up, his voice resonating with an almost clinical enthusiasm. "The resilience of these diminutive creatures, their evolutionary adaptations to urban squalor, one finds an entire microcosm of biological enterprise, if one only knows where to look." I, meanwhile, endeavoured to immerse myself in the morning's issue of The Lancet, though my attention frequently drifted to the grotesque tableau across the room. It was moments such as these, when the public's clamour for Holmes's unique talents temporarily abated, that he would retreat into these abstruse scientific diversions, much to my often strained forbearance. Our quiet was, however, destined to be short-lived. A sudden, insistent pounding upon the outer door shattered the domestic peace, followed by the agitated scuffling of boots on the stair. Mrs. Hudson's distressed voice, attempting to pacify an obviously overwrought visitor, reached us clearly. Holmes, with a sigh that bordered on theatrical, carefully set down his needle and turned from his table. "Ah, Watson," he observed with a slight knowing curl of his lip, "the microcosm must wait. It seems the macrocosm, in its usual chaotic fashion, demands our immediate attention, and from the sound of it, a rather urgent and distressed portion of it at that." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson, her face flushed with concern, ushered into our sitting-room a man whose appearance spoke volumes of his recent ordeal. He was of middling height, dressed in the respectable, if now dishevelled attire of a city merchant. His normally placid features were contorted by a profound anxiety, and his usually neat brown hair was in a state of wild disarray. His hands trembled noticeably as he gripped the brim of his bowler hat. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped, his voice raspy with emotion, "I beg your pardon for this intrusion, but I am in desperate need of your help. A terrible thing has happened." Holmes, ever the epitome of calm in a crisis, gestured towards the armchair by the fireplace. "Pray be seated, sir. You appear to be in considerable distress. A glass of brandy, perhaps, Watson?" I retrieved the decanter, and the man, with a grateful nod, took a deep gulp that seemed to steady his nerves, if only marginally. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he introduced himself, though his voice still wavered. I was a colleague of Mr. Alistair Finch. The Alistair Finch, the renowned auctioneer." Holmes's eyes, which had been observing Pendleton with their usual piercing intensity, sharpened almost imperceptibly at the mention of the name. "Alistair Finch, you say? A man of considerable reputation in the art market. What calamity has befallen him, Mr. Pendleton?" Pendleton buried his face in his hands. "He's dead, Mr. Holmes. Found this morning. Murdered." The simple, blunt declaration hung in the air, chilling the already damp atmosphere of the room. I felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, that peculiar excitement which invariably accompanied the grim news of a new case. Holmes, however, merely steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the window. "Indeed," he murmured, his voice betraying no emotion. "And the circumstances, Mr. Pendleton? Pray, recount them in full detail, omitting nothing, no matter how trivial it may seem to your lay perception." Pendleton took another deep, shuddering breath. It was this morning, at his private residence on Bond Street, a magnificent townhouse filled with his acquisitions. His housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, found him, in the grand salon, lying amidst the very art he cherished. "And the cause of death?" Holmes pressed. "The police are there now," Pendleton continued, his words tumbling out faster. "Inspector Lestrade, I believe. They say he was stabbed, repeatedly. A brutal attack, Mr. Holmes. Quite barbaric." "Stabbed," Holmes repeated, his brow furrowing slightly. "And what, Mr. Pendleton, brings you here to me, rather than relying solely on the admirable, if occasionally pedestrian efforts of Scotland Yard?" Because, Mr. Holmes, Pendleton leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation, this isn't just a simple robbery gone wrong. Not for Alistair. He had been different of late, utterly unlike himself, obsessed with this one painting he was to auction. A painting, I interjected, already reaching for my notebook. What painting? The Serpent's Embrace, Pendleton explained, his voice taking on a hushed, almost reverent tone. A truly exquisite piece, purportedly by an obscure Renaissance master, Niccolò d'Amalfi, lost for centuries, only recently rediscovered. It depicted a classical scene, a nymph intertwined with an enormous emerald-eyed serpent. Its beauty was captivating, but there was something unsettling about it too. Unsettling how? Holmes prompted, a new flicker of interest in his eyes. Alistair had become consumed by it, Pendleton elaborated. He acquired it through unusual channels, he hinted. Said it was the find of his career, yet he also spoke of it with a strange apprehension. He spent hours alone with it, staring at it, almost as if he were trying to unravel a secret. He grew withdrawn, suspicious. He spoke of whispers, of being watched. He even hired private security, though he was always a man who valued his privacy above all else. Paranoia, then? Holmes mused. Perhaps. Or perhaps a premonition, Pendleton replied darkly. He was due to put the Serpent's Embrace up for private auction next week, a sale that would have undoubtedly broken all records. He told me just yesterday in a hushed tone that he felt a great danger attached to the painting and to its sale. And the painting, Mr. Pendleton? Was it stolen from the premises? Holmes inquired, his gaze now fixed upon Pendleton's agitated face, observing every twitch and hesitation. Pendleton shook his head. That's the peculiar part, Mr. Holmes. Mrs. Gable said it was still there, untouched, as if the murderer cared nothing for its immense value. This indeed was a curious detail, a renowned auctioneer, a brutal murder, a priceless painting left behind. The motive, if not robbery, lay deeper. Any other peculiar observations, Mr. Pendleton? Holmes asked. Anything, no matter how fleeting, that struck you as unusual? Pendleton hesitated, chewing on his lip. Well, there's a rumour, Mr. Holmes. I heard it from Mrs. Gable, who heard it from the constable guarding the door. Apparently, one of the neighbours, an elderly gentleman with a penchant for early morning constitutional, mentioned seeing someone quite distinct, leaving the Finch residence shortly before the body was discovered. And this distinct individual? Holmes inquired, his eyes narrowing slightly. A man, Pendleton stammered, with very bright red hair, almost unnaturally vivid. Not a shade one often sees, especially in such intensity. Holmes's left eyebrow arched, a subtle but significant gesture. Red hair, you say? An interesting detail. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. Your information has been most illuminating. It is. Watson? The journey to Bond Street was a slow, deliberate crawl through the oppressive fog. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of sound and motion, seemed muted, almost spectral. The gas lamps cast haloed glows that barely pierced the gloom, and the clip-clop of our hansom's horse echoed strangely in the heavy air. A curious case, Watson, Holmes remarked, leaning back against the worn leather upholstery, his eyes closed in thought. A man of considerable means and reputation, brutally murdered, yet a painting of astronomical value left undisturbed. It speaks not of common avarice, but of something far more complex, perhaps even personal. And the red-headed man? I ventured, scribbling furiously in my notebook. Do you place any significance on that, Holmes? He opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. Significance, my dear Watson, is a relative term. At present, it is an isolated observation, a loose thread. But in our line of work, even the most seemingly insignificant thread can, when pulled correctly, unravel an entire tapestry of deceit. It is, shall we say, a detail worth noting, for its sheer improbability, if nothing else. Pendleton seemed genuinely distressed, I observed. He spoke of Finch's recent odd behaviour, his paranoia about the painting. Indeed, Holmes nodded. A critical point, Watson. A man does not suddenly develop a persecution complex without cause, nor does a seasoned art dealer become consumed by a single work of art merely for its aesthetic appeal. There is a story here beneath the surface, a narrative woven with fear and, I suspect, dangerous secrets. The hansom pulled up at last before a stately Georgian townhouse, its elegant facade now partially obscured by police constables and the morbidly curious onlookers who, despite the miserable weather, had gathered like vultures. The address was unmistakably that of Alistair Finch. A police barrier had been erected, and the scene buzzed with a low, murmuring activity. Amongst the constables, I spotted the familiar, stoic figure of Inspector Lestrade, his bulldog jaw set firm, his eyes scanning the scene with an air of harried determination. He spotted Holmes and, with a resigned sigh, pushed his way through the crowd towards us. "Holmes?" Lestrade greeted, his tone a mixture of grudging respect and exasperation. "I might have known you'd be drawn to this like a moth to a flame. Another of your insoluble puzzles, I suppose." "On the contrary, Inspector," Holmes replied smoothly, a glint in his eyes. "Every puzzle, however intricate, possesses a solution. It merely requires the application of logic and a keen eye. And speaking of keen eyes, what have yours deduced thus far regarding the unfortunate demise of Mr. Alistair Finch?" Lestrade grunted, leading us through the cordon and into the house. The interior was magnificent, a testament to Finch's wealth and refined taste. Tapestries adorned the walls, ancient artifacts stood in glass cases, and the air, despite the grim circumstances, still held a faint scent of old leather and polished wood. "A messy business, Holmes," Lestrade began as we stepped into the grand salon. "Found by his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, shortly after 7 this morning. Stabbed multiple times. A bloody affair, by the looks of it." The scene within the salon was indeed gruesome. Alistair Finch lay sprawled on the priceless Persian rug, his limbs contorted, a dark stain blossoming beneath him. The opulent furnishings seemed to mock the violence that had transpired. Broken porcelain shards lay scattered near a toppled pedestal, remnants of a vase or statue. It was a tableau of sudden, savage disruption. Holmes, however, barely glanced at the body. His eyes, sharp and predatory, swept across the room. He circled the periphery, a human divining rod, his gaze lingering on the details Lestrade's men might have overlooked, a faint scuff mark on the polished floorboards, a barely disturbed curtain, a loose thread caught on the leg of a table. He didn't speak, but his silent intensity spoke volumes. "Any signs of forced entry, Inspector?" I inquired, stepping cautiously. "None that we can find. Doctor," Lestrade replied, gesturing to a junior constable who was carefully examining the main door. "The locks are intact, no broken windows, points to someone known to the victim, or someone who gained entry by deception." Holmes, meanwhile, had knelt beside an overturned armchair, his fingers delicately probing the fabric. "Remarkably specific damage, Inspector," he mused without looking up. "Not a general struggle, but a focused, almost desperate attempt to dislodge something." "He put up a fight, if that's what you mean," Lestrade said dismissively. "Indeed. But against what or whom, specifically targeting this chair?" Holmes replied, his voice a low hum. He rose, dusting his knees, and moved towards a large ornate easel draped with a velvet cloth. "And this, I presume, is the painting of which Mr. Pendleton spoke?" Lestrade nodded. "Aye, the Serpent's embrace. Worth a king's ransom, they say. Odd, isn't it, that a killer would leave such a prize?" Holmes carefully drew back the velvet cloth. Even in the dim light of the fog-shrouded room, the painting was striking. It depicted a classical figure, a woman, her form both ethereal and alluring, entwined with a magnificent serpent. The creature's scales shimmered with impossible greens, and its eyes, indeed, seemed to glow with an unnerving emerald intensity. There was a peculiar, almost hypnotic quality to it, a blend of beauty and subtle menace. A masterpiece, undoubtedly. Holmes acknowledged, his gaze fixed on the canvas, not just observing its artistry, but scrutinizing its very surface, and remarkably, entirely intact, not a scratch upon it, as if the killer held it in particular regard. "Perhaps they were interrupted," Lestrade suggested, ever pragmatic. "Perhaps. Or perhaps, Inspector, their motive was not pecuniary," Holmes countered, his eyes still exploring the painting. He leaned closer, his nose almost touching the canvas, then straightened up slowly. "Interesting. Very interesting indeed." He then turned his attention to Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a small bird-like woman who sat huddled on a settee, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. "Mrs. Gable," Holmes said gently, his voice unusually soft. "My deepest sympathies on your tragic loss. Would you be so kind as to recount in your own words what you observed this morning?" Mrs. Gable sniffled. I came in at my usual time, sir, just after 6. Mr. Finch was always an early riser, but I found the front door ajar, which was most unlike him. He was a stickler for security. I called out, but there was no answer. I thought perhaps he'd gone out for a morning stroll, though he hadn't done so in weeks, not since he brought that painting home. She gestured vaguely towards the easel. "And when did Mr. Finch acquire this painting, The Serpent's Embrace?" Holmes asked. "About 3 months ago, sir," she replied. "He had it delivered by private courier. Ever since then, he changed. He became agitated. He would pace the halls at night. He ate very little. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, locking doors that were already locked. He even slept in this very salon for a while, with the painting as if he felt it needed guarding." "Did he have any visitors during this period of agitation?" Holmes probed. "Anyone unusual?" "Only his usual associates from the art world," Mrs. Gable said after a moment's thought. "And Mr. Pendleton, of course. But there was one fellow. He came several times, always late at night, and Mr. Finch would insist on meeting him alone in the study. He was a rather striking individual." "Striking how, Mrs. Gable?"
Well,
she hesitated. "He was a very tall man, with a peculiar gait, and he had the most extraordinary head of hair, sir. A very vivid shade of red. Not auburn, mind you, but a truly fiery, almost shocking red. I only ever caught glimpses of him, but his hair, you couldn't miss it." I looked at Holmes, who remained impassive, the red-headed man, twice mentioned now. "And this man, did he have a name?" Holmes inquired. "I never heard it, sir," she admitted, wiping her eyes. "Mr. Finch always called him the Curator, and he would always leave through the side entrance, never the main door, even in the middle of the night." "The Curator," Holmes murmured, filing the name away. "A curious appellation. And you found Mr. Finch in this state how long after arriving?" "Within minutes, sir," she confirmed, shuddering. "I entered the salon, and there he was. It was dreadful." Holmes then turned to a younger constable, who was taking notes near the window. "Constable, I understand an early riser, a neighbour, provided a statement regarding a person seen leaving the premises this morning. Could you kindly recount it?" The young constable, clearly intimidated by Holmes's presence, consulted his notebook. "Yes, sir. Mr. Elias Thorne, of number 14 Bond Street, claims he was out for his usual morning stroll at approximately 6:45 a.m. Saw a figure emerge from Mr. Finch's side gate, where the dustbins are kept. The figure was moving at a hurried pace. Mr. Thorne described him as tall and slender, and noted particularly his flaming red hair, like a beacon in the fog. 3 separate mentions of a striking red-haired individual, all in close proximity to the time and location of the murder. It was no longer a mere coincidence." Holmes straightened up, his eyes gleaming with a familiar intellectual fire. "Lestrade," he said, turning to the inspector, "I believe we have more than a simple robbery murder here. This Serpent's Embrace painting, Mr. Finch's sudden paranoia, the repeated appearances of our vividly coiffed individual, referred to as the Curator, these are not the threads of a common crime. This points to something far more intricate, a clandestine world, perhaps, where art is not merely bought and sold, but coveted, stolen, and perhaps even forged." Lestrade scoffed. "Forged? You're jumping at shadows, Holmes. A man's dead. Let's find his killer." "And so we shall, Inspector. But understanding the context of his death is paramount to identifying the true perpetrator and their motive. I believe Mr. Alistair Finch stumbled upon a secret far larger and more dangerous than any rare painting. A secret that cost him his life." Holmes paused, his gaze sweeping over the chaotic scene, his mind already piecing together the invisible puzzle. "Watson," he said, turning to me, a glint of excitement in his eyes, "our work has just begun. There is a serpent in the art world, and I fear it has just begun to coil. First," he continued, turning back to Lestrade, "I shall require full access to Mr. Finch's ledgers and correspondence. Every last scrap of paper. I have a suspicion that the key to this Curator and the true nature of the Serpent's Embrace lies not in the blood on the rug, but in the meticulous records of a man who dealt in beauty and perhaps in deception." The fog outside seemed to thicken, mirroring the growing complexity of the case. The death of Alistair Finch was not an isolated incident. It was merely the first grisly thread of a much larger, more dangerous tapestry. And at its heart, a rare painting, a secretive Curator, and a flash of vivid red hair beckoned us into the labyrinthine world of artistic shadows. Chapter 2. The Whisper of the Canvas. The chill of the Bond Street salon lingered with us even after our return to Baker Street, a morbid dampness that seemed to have permeated our very clothes. Holmes, though outwardly composed, was a man whose mind was already racing, connecting invisible threads from the chaotic scene we had left behind. He paced our sitting room, a veritable caged tiger, his long, lean figure silhouetted against the gaslight, pausing occasionally to tap a thoughtful finger against his chin. "Watson," he began without preamble, addressing the mantelpiece more than me, "the absence of pecuniary motive in such a brutal affair is, in itself, a motive. A killer who leaves behind a fortune in art but takes a life does so for reasons far removed from the common thief. This Serpent's Embrace painting, unblemished, untouched, it is either the central prize or merely a highly significant symbol." I had settled into my armchair, my notebook open, eager to record his every pronouncement. "And the red-headed man, Holmes?" The Curator, as Finch's housekeeper called him, seen thrice now in such telling proximity to the victim and the crime. Holmes halted his pacing, turning to face me, his eyes alight with that peculiar brilliance that marked the engagement of his formidable intellect. "Ah, the red-headed gentleman. He is undoubtedly our most immediate and promising thread, Watson. His vivid coiffure, a physical anomaly, makes him memorable, almost impossible to overlook. He is a person who, by his very appearance, demands attention, yet seems to operate in the shadows. A contradiction that intrigues me greatly." "What do you make of the Curator appellation?" I asked. "Does it suggest a connection to a gallery, or perhaps a private collection?" "A pertinent question, my dear fellow," Holmes acknowledged, resuming his pacing. "A curator typically organizes, preserves, and interprets a collection. This suggests an intimate knowledge of art, perhaps even an authoritative role within that sphere. It implies a systematic approach, not the random violence of a street thug. And the secrecy of his visits, the use of the side entrance. Finch, a man of such prominence, clearly did not wish these meetings to be widely known. What kind of curatorial duties would necessitate such elaborate discretion? Perhaps he was vetting the Serpent's Embrace for Finch prior to the auction, I mused, ensuring its authenticity. Holmes paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "An admirable thought, Watson, and entirely logical given the context. But consider, if the Curator was merely an authenticator, why the secrecy? Why the apparent paranoia Finch exhibited after acquiring the painting? And why, pray tell, would an authenticator be present at Finch's residence in the pre-dawn hours of his murder?" He plucked his pipe from the rack, filled it with his strongest shag and lit it, a plume of acrid smoke momentarily obscuring his features. "No, Watson, this Curator is more than a mere expert. He is, I suspect, deeply entwined in the hidden narratives surrounding this Serpent's Embrace. His presence at the scene, juxtaposed with the painting's continued presence, suggests a motive far removed from a desire for the canvas itself." Our discussion was interrupted by Mrs. Hudson, who, with an air of long-suffering politeness, announced that a large package had arrived from Scotland Yard, accompanied by a note from Inspector Lestrade. It was, as Holmes had requested, Mr. Alistair Finch's ledgers and correspondence, delivered with commendable alacrity. The box, when opened, spilled forth a veritable torrent of papers, leather-bound ledgers, stacks of meticulously organized invoices, rolls of receipt paper, and bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons. The sheer volume of documentation was daunting. Holmes, however, was in his element. He approached the chaotic pile with the same clinical precision he might apply to a difficult chemical analysis. He donned his spectacles, lit another pipe, and immersed himself, his fingers sifting through the papers with an almost preternatural speed, his eyes scanning,
the pulse of a man's
professional life, Watson, he murmured, pulling out a particularly thick ledger. "Every transaction, every negotiation, every secret whisper of the art market contained within these dusty pages. Here lies the true narrative of Alistair Finch's final months." Hours passed in the profound silence of our sitting room, broken only by the crackle of the fire, the rustle of paper, and the occasional sharp intake of Holmes's breath. I occupied myself with a medical journal, but my thoughts continually returned to the macabre scene on Bond Street and the perplexing nature of the case. Finally, as the gas lamps outside began to cast longer, more definite shadows upon the street, Holmes straightened up, stretching his long limbs with a satisfying groan. He had arrayed a selection of documents on the floor around him, like a hand of cards waiting to be played. "Fascinating, Watson. Truly fascinating," he declared, his eyes gleaming. The meticulousness of Finch's record-keeping is a double-edged sword for our hypothetical curator. While it undoubtedly details his every legitimate transaction, it also, by its very omissions and peculiarities, shouts volumes about his clandestine dealings. He picked up a small, slim ledger, bound in a dark, unassuming leather. "This, Watson, is not one of Finch's public ledgers. This is a private journal disguised as a common inventory book. Observe the entries here." He pointed with a slender finger to a series of dates. "For the past 3 months, coinciding precisely with the acquisition of the Serpent's embrace, there are regular weekly payments made, not to a gallery or a known dealer, but to an anonymous entry, Account X. The sums are substantial, far beyond what one would pay for authentication services." "Account X?" I queried. "Could it be a code for an individual?" "Precisely," Holmes confirmed. "And more. Alongside these payments there are cryptic notes, verification complete, proceed with caution, source secured, risk assessment high, and most telling of all, repeated references to the Guild and the Red Hand." The Guild, the Red Hand. I felt a familiar shiver of excitement. "Secret societies, Holmes." "Perhaps, Watson, perhaps," he mused, a thoughtful frown upon his brow. "Or perhaps merely a self-aggrandizing title for a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The Red Hand, however, is a most suggestive moniker, given our red-headed friend. It is entirely possible that our curator is not merely an individual, but a high-ranking member of this Red Hand, or indeed the Guild." He then produced a sheaf of letters, written on thick, unwatermarked paper. "These are even more illuminating. They are coded, Watson, using a simple but effective substitution cipher. Fortunately, Finch, with his artistic sensibilities, used a key derived from a minor Flemish artist's signature, a flourish I recognized after a moment's study." Holmes slid a decoded letter across the table to me. I read it aloud, my voice tinged with surprise. "Curator, the acquisition is complete. The Serpent's embrace is secure. However, its provenance is problematic. The family in Trieste were most insistent upon anonymity, and their demands for discretion border on the extreme. I believe we are dealing with a deeply ingrained secret, not merely a forgotten masterpiece. The whispers of its true nature are unsettling. I require your immediate counsel regarding its adjustment. The usual channels will not suffice for this piece. We must consider the black market gallery for its final disposition, as previously discussed. Alistair." "Good heavens, Holmes," I exclaimed, looking up from the letter. "Adjustment? That surely implies forgery." "Indeed, Watson. A rather elegant euphemism for what is, in essence, the fraudulent alteration of a masterpiece," Holmes affirmed, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "Finch, it seems, was not merely an auctioneer of repute, but an active participant in a sophisticated network of art forgery and illicit trade. The Serpent's embrace was not merely rediscovered. It was, in all likelihood, discovered in order to be adjusted and then laundered through the legitimate market." "And the Black Market Gallery?" I asked. "A name that speaks for itself, does it not?" Holmes retorted. "It suggests an underground auction house, a clandestine venue where art, often of questionable provenance, is traded amongst individuals who prefer to operate outside the glare of public scrutiny. This is where our red-headed curator comes into focus, Watson. He is not merely an authenticator, but a master orchestrator of these illicit transformations, perhaps even the artistic talent behind the adjustments themselves. His visits to Finch were not for consultation, but for collaboration." Holmes then picked up a crumpled piece of paper, distinct from the other meticulous records. It was a hastily drawn sketch, a rough diagram of what appeared to be a complex mechanical device, with annotations in Finch's hand. "And this, Watson," Holmes continued, his voice dropping slightly, "suggests Finch was exploring something beyond mere artistic alteration, optical illusion, projection, enhancement of features. This indicates a more elaborate deception, a modification of the painting itself, perhaps even a method to reveal some hidden aspect of it. So Finch was murdered because he knew too much about this forgery ring, or perhaps he was attempting to expose them?" I surmised. "A most plausible theory, Watson," Holmes conceded. His increasing paranoia, his decision to hire private security, his growing apprehension about the Serpent's embrace, it all points to a man who had become entangled in something far more dangerous than he had anticipated, and was perhaps attempting to extricate himself. Or, conversely, he was on the verge of revealing a secret that would have ruined the Guild, or the Red Hand. "And the specific damage to the armchair in the salon?" I asked, recalling Holmes's earlier observation. Holmes's eyes twinkled. "Ah, the armchair. I noticed a faint, almost invisible residue upon the fabric, near the armrest, a microscopic trace of what appeared to be a particular type of oil paint, not commonly found in an auctioneer's residence, coupled with the distinct, focused damage to the chair, as if something was violently pulled from it. I suspect, Watson, that the Curator was not merely present at the time of the murder, but that the murder itself was intimately connected to whatever was concealed within or beneath that armchair. Perhaps a hidden compartment containing a crucial document or an item of significance to the Serrata's embrace. So the killer was searching for something, not just inflicting vengeance. "Precisely," Holmes confirmed, "and they were successful. Whatever was there is now gone. This explains the brutal nature of the attack, the desperate attempt to extract whatever Finch held hidden. The Serpent's embrace was merely the bait, the distraction. The true prize was elsewhere, concealed but intimately connected to the painting's illicit history." The deductions, built brick by painstaking brick, were beginning to form a terrifying structure. The seemingly random murder of Alistair Finch was now revealing itself as the brutal consequence of a highly organized, audacious criminal enterprise, operating at the highest echelons of the art world. "Our next step, Watson," Holmes declared, rising from the floor and carefully gathering the decoded letters and Finch's private journal, "is to uncover the precise nature of this black market gallery. It is unlikely to be a publicly listed establishment. Its name suggests an ephemeral, transient nature, a secret rendezvous for those who operate beyond the law. And for that, we shall need to immerse ourselves in the shadowed underbelly of London's art scene," and began meticulously preparing a series of small glass vials. "I shall also require a sample of the paint from the Serpent's embrace, if Lestrade will permit it. And I intend to examine the painting with an ultraviolet lamp to reveal any adjustments that may have been made. A forger, no matter how skilled, often leaves a trace, a whisper of their deception, visible only to the most discerning eye and the most advanced scientific methods." "Do you think Lestrade will allow such liberties with evidence?" I asked, knowing the inspector's stubborn nature. "Lestrade, bless his methodical heart, will likely see the wisdom in my methods when presented with an opportunity to close a case that baffles his more conventional approaches," Holmes replied with a characteristic flicker of amusement. "Besides, I believe he is beginning to appreciate the distinction between a simple criminal and a truly complex adversary. This Curator is not a man to be underestimated." The following morning, after dispatching a concise but persuasive note to Lestrade, Holmes and I found ourselves once more navigating the bustling thoroughfares of London, though this time our destination was a less savoury quarter than the fashionable elegance of Bond Street. Our inquiry into the Black Market Gallery had led Holmes to a dingy public house in a forgotten alley off Seven Dials, a place frequented by informants and those who traded in secrets. The air inside was thick with stale tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap ale. Rough voices mingled with the clatter of tankards, and the general atmosphere was one of suspicion and guarded glances. Holmes, though conspicuous in his refined attire, carried himself with an air of detached authority that seemed to part the sea of unsavoury characters before him. He approached the bar, where a burly, one-eyed landlord was wiping down the counter with a greasy rag. "My good man," Holmes began, his voice low and commanding, "I seek information regarding a rather exclusive establishment, one that deals in, shall we say, acquisitions of unique provenance. It is known, I believe, as the Black Market Gallery." The landlord, a man whose face was a roadmap of past indiscretions, stopped wiping, his single eye narrowing. "Never heard of it, Governor. Only honest trade here." Holmes placed a sovereign on the counter. The coin glinted in the dim light. "Perhaps your memory requires a slight lubrication, my friend. I am not interested in exposing secrets, merely in attending an exhibition. I am a discerning collector, and I hear their latest collection is quite illuminating." The landlord eyed the sovereign, then Holmes's unwavering gaze, and finally, with a grunt, pocketed the coin. "There's a warehouse down by the Thames near Wapping Old Stairs. Don't got a sign. Looks derelict. But if you know the knock, Tuesdays and Thursdays after midnight, they only let in the right sort." "And the right sort?" Holmes prompted, his eyes gleaming. The landlord leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You got to have a ticket, governor, a special invitation, and you got to know the password for the night. Changes every time, it does." "And the source of these invitations?" Holmes pressed. The landlord merely shrugged, a subtle gesture that implied a deeper layer of secrecy. "Comes from the curator, they say. He's the one who orchestrates the whole show." Holmes offered another sovereign, which vanished into the landlord's pocket with astonishing speed. "One final question, my good man. Have you ever, by any chance, encountered an individual associated with this curator? A man of striking, almost fiery red hair?" The landlord's single eye widened imperceptibly, and a flicker of something akin to fear crossed his hardened features. "Heard whispers, I have. They say he's the Red Hand himself. A dangerous man, sir, not one to cross. His temper's as fiery as his hair, they say, and his reach is long." Holmes thanked the landlord and ushered me out into the grimy alley. The fog, if anything, had grown thicker, and the air was heavy with the damp industrial scent of the Thames. "The Red Hand himself," Holmes mused as we walked, his voice thoughtful. "The connection between the nickname from Finch's ledger and the physical description of our individual is now firmly established. Our red-headed man is not merely a curator, but a powerful figure, indeed perhaps the leader of this clandestine organization, a man whose influence extends to the murky depths of London's underworld." "But how do we obtain a ticket and the password for this black market gallery?" I asked, feeling a surge of both excitement and apprehension. Holmes's lips curved into a predatory smile. "That, my dear Watson, is where our talents for observation and deduction truly come into play. A clandestine auction house operating with such secrecy must rely on an equally clandestine method of communication. Finch's correspondence, particularly any recent unsent letters, may hold the key. Or, perhaps, a more direct approach will be necessary." Back at Baker Street, Holmes meticulously examined Finch's remaining papers, focusing on any unsent letters, any unusual notations, anything that might serve as an invitation to such a discreet event. He also began the laborious process of analyzing the paint sample from the Serpent's embrace under his microscope, searching for any anomalies, any chemical inconsistencies that might betray a modern hand at work. As the evening deepened, Holmes finally found what he was looking for. A small, exquisitely engraved card tucked away in a hidden compartment of Finch's desk, bearing no name, only a symbol, a stylized coiled serpent with an emerald eye. On the reverse, written in Finch's elegant hand, was a single cryptic phrase: "The canvas whispers truth." "The invitation, Watson," Holmes announced, holding up the card triumphantly. "And the password, if I am not mistaken. The canvas whispers truth. A rather poetic, if ironic, phrase for an exhibition of forgeries, wouldn't you agree?" "But how do we know it's for the correct night?" I inquired. "These operations, Watson, often adhere to rigid, pre-established schedules. Given Finch's murder, it is highly probable that the auction of the Serpent's embrace was merely postponed, not cancelled. Therefore, the next scheduled Tuesday or Thursday auction is our most likely target. Tonight is Tuesday. We shall try our luck." A sense of anticipation filled the air. This was no longer a mere investigation. It was an infiltration. We were to descend into the very heart of the criminal enterprise, to confront the Red Hand on his own ground. Holmes meticulously loaded his revolver, ensuring each chamber was full. I, too, checked my service revolver. A sense of grim determination settled between us. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice calm, yet with an edge of excitement, "tonight we attend a most exclusive gallery. We shall see precisely what truths the canvas whispers, and perhaps finally come face to face with the enigmatic curator, the man with the red hair who holds the key to Alistair Finch's brutal end." The fog had tightened its grip on London as we stepped out into the night. The city seemed to hold its breath, and the distant chiming of Big Ben echoed through the spectral gloom, marking the inexorable march towards our dangerous rendezvous in the hidden world of art and deception. The whisper of the canvas called to us, promising secrets and perhaps even greater peril. Chapter 3. The Serpent's True Form. The fog, that ubiquitous blanket of London, had thickened into an impenetrable shroud as Holmes and I ventured forth from Baker Street. It clung to us, damp and chilling, muffling the clip-clop of our hansom's horse and transforming the familiar cityscape into a series of spectral fleetings against the encroaching darkness, now merely cast blurry, impotent halos, their light struggling to pierce the oppressive gloom. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every distant cough a warning. Holmes, however, seemed to thrive in this atmospheric oppression. He sat opposite me, a silhouette of profound concentration, his eyes, though obscured by the night and the swirling mist, undoubtedly alight with the intellectual ardour that invariably preceded a dangerous enterprise. His mind, I knew, was already charting the treacherous currents of the underworld we were about to enter. "Watson," he remarked, his voice a low, almost conspiratorial murmur, "the greatest deceptions are often shrouded not in outright lies, but in the subtle distortion of truth. Our black market gallery is, I suspect, a masterclass in such distortion. A place where art, stripped of its legitimate lineage, acquires a new illicit value, and the Curator, our red-headed antagonist, is the architect of this artistic subterfuge." "Do you truly believe he is the leader of the Red Hand?" I inquired, checking the readiness of my revolver for the third time. The cold steel felt reassuring against my palm. "His omnipresence, Watson, is too consistent to be coincidental," Holmes replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Finch's secret ledger, the housekeeper's testimony, the informant in 7 Dials, all point to a singular, striking individual at the nexus of this conspiracy. A man whose distinctive appearance belies a profound need for secrecy. A delightful paradox, wouldn't you agree?" "And the Serpent's embrace painting, Holmes?" I pressed. "You believe it to be a forgery or merely adjusted?" "That, my dear Watson, is the very truth the canvas is purported to whisper," Holmes mused. "My preliminary examination of the paint under the microscope revealed a peculiar layering, a slight variation in the chemical composition of the pigments beneath the outermost layer, inconsistent with a single, continuous application by a Renaissance master. A highly skilled alteration, undoubtedly. But the exact nature of that alteration, and what it conceals, remains the central enigma. And that crumpled sketch Finch made, the optical illusion notes, suggests a far more elaborate deception than a simple overpainting." Our hansom eventually lurched to a halt in a desolate alley near Wapping Old Stairs. The air here was heavy with the brackish scent of the Thames, mingling with the acrid tang of coal smoke and decay. The warehouse district, a labyrinth of dark brick structures and shadowed lanes, seemed perfectly suited for clandestine activities. The landlord's description had been accurate. The building before us appeared utterly derelict, its windows boarded, its facade crumbling. Holmes surveyed the building for a long moment, his eyes darting across its dilapidated surface. "A clever disguise, Watson, the very picture of abandonment. No legitimate business would consider such a locale. It is designed to repel the curious, to invite neglect." He led the way to a heavy, iron-bound door, almost swallowed by the crumbling brickwork. There was no bell, no knocker. Holmes rapped a precise, intricate sequence of knocks upon the wood, a complex rhythm that resonated faintly in the stillness of the alley. After a moment, a small square panel slid open at eye level, revealing a pair of suspicious, wary eyes. "Purpose," a gruff voice demanded from within. Holmes held up the small, exquisitely engraved card, the one with the stylized coiled serpent. The eyes behind the panel widened almost imperceptibly, and then, after a brief pause, the panel slid shut. We heard the metallic click of bolts being drawn back, and the heavy door creaked open, revealing a burly, taciturn man whose frame filled the doorway. He nodded curtly, allowing us entry. The interior of the warehouse was a startling contrast to its dilapidated exterior. Beyond a short, dimly lit corridor, we emerged into a vast, cavernous space, astonishingly transformed. The rough brick walls were now draped with opulent crimson velvet, dimly illuminated by strategically placed gas lamps that cast a warm, if somewhat theatrical, glow. The air, though still carrying a faint echo of the Thames, was now infused with the subtle scent of aged canvas and polished wood. Dozens of figures, men and women of considerable wealth and questionable repute, mingled amongst easels and pedestals, their hushed conversations creating a low, murmuring hum that filled the space. They were a diverse collection. Old money with an insatiable appetite for the illicit, newly rich industrialists seeking to legitimize their fortunes through art, and the occasional shadowy figure whose true profession remained unspoken. Our eyes, however, were immediately drawn to the central display. There, bathed in the singular brilliance of a large, focused lamp, stood the very object of our investigation, the Serpent's embrace. It was even more magnificent than I remembered, its colours vibrant, its enigmatic beauty captivating. Around it, other artworks, some clearly genuine, others undoubtedly adjusted, were displayed with a deceptive air of legitimacy. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice barely audible above the hum of conversation. "The perfect tableau. An illusion of legality, a veneer of respectability, all designed to facilitate the trade in deception. Note the subtle nods, the furtive glances, the unwritten rules of engagement. This is a society of shadows, built upon mutual silence." As we moved deeper into the improvised gallery, Holmes scanned the faces, his gaze lingering on each individual, seeking any anomaly, any telltale sign of recognition or suspicion. He moved with an almost ethereal grace, a ghost among the connoisseurs. Then I saw him. Standing near the Serpent's embrace, commanding the attention of a small cluster of eager buyers, was a man whose presence was undeniably striking. He was tall, slender, with a presence that seemed to fill the very air around him, and his hair was a shock of vibrant, fiery red, a colour that seemed to glow even in the subdued lighting of the gallery. It was unmistakably the Curator. He was speaking with a cultured, resonant voice, gesturing towards the painting with an elegant hand. His movements were precise, almost theatrical. He exuded an air of supreme confidence, a master holding court. "That, Watson," Holmes whispered, a predatory gleam in his eyes, "is our Red Hand. The architect of Alistair Finch's demise, I have no doubt. His confidence, his mastery of this illicit domain, suggests a man who believes himself untouchable." We positioned ourselves at a discreet distance, close enough to observe and listen, but far enough to avoid drawing immediate attention. The Curator was extolling the virtues of the Serpent's embrace, weaving a narrative of its supposed rediscovery, its unparalleled artistry, and its immense historical significance. His words were persuasive, his delivery flawless. "Gentlemen, ladies," the Curator announced, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "tonight you have the rare privilege of witnessing a piece that transcends mere art. The Serpent's Embrace by Niccolò d'Amalfi, lost to the ages, rediscovered by sheer fortune, its provenance meticulously authenticated." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "There have, of course, been whispers, rumours of modern touches. Indeed, in an age rife with imitation, one must be exceedingly vigilant. But I assure you, after my exhaustive personal study, confirmed by my esteemed colleague, the late Mr. Alistair Finch, this is the genuine article. A true masterpiece. A true masterpiece, meticulously authenticated, yet a painting that Finch himself, in his private correspondence, acknowledged as needing adjustment. The brazenness of the deception, a keen, intelligent blue, seemed to flick in our direction, a brief, almost imperceptible glance that lingered for a fraction of a second too long. Had he recognized Holmes? It was impossible to tell, but a prickle of unease ran down my spine. "Now," the Curator continued, his gaze sweeping across the eager faces before him, "before we proceed to the bidding, allow me to demonstrate a feature that makes this piece truly unique. A hidden detail, only visible under precise conditions, which amplifies its power and reveals a deeper narrative." He gestured to a hidden mechanism, and the main gas lamp above the painting dimmed slightly. Then a smaller, specially designed light source was revealed, casting a narrow beam across the canvas. As the light hit the painting, a remarkable transformation began to occur. The emerald eyes of the Serpent, which had seemed merely painted, began to shimmer with an uncanny luminescence. The scales, already vibrant, now seemed to ripple and shift, creating an illusion of movement. But most startling of all, a subtle image began to emerge within the coils of the Serpent, a faint, almost subliminal portrait, distinct from the nymph. It was the face of a man, his features etched with profound sorrow and fear, and in his eye a glint of recognition. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled connoisseurs. This was the optical illusion and enhancement of features Finch had sketched. This was the whisper of truth the canvas was meant to reveal. Holmes beside me stiffened. His eyes fixed on the painting narrowed to slits. "Good heavens, Watson," he breathed, his voice tight with sudden realization. "It is a subtle projection, a cunning device hidden within the frame, reflecting an image onto the canvas, perhaps triggered by the precise angle and intensity of light. And that face, it is unmistakable." "Who is it, Holmes?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "Niccolò d'Amalfi," Holmes replied, his voice grim. "The supposed artist of the Serpent's embrace, but not as a self-portrait. No, Watson, that is the face of a man in terror, pleading, perhaps, for vengeance. This painting is not merely a forgery, it is a confession, or a cry for help." The curator, meanwhile, basking in the awe of his audience, smiled. "A testament, you see, to the master's genius, a hidden signature, a spiritual imprint, visible only to the truly discerning, a piece that tells its own story." Just as the curator was about to open the bidding, the warehouse was plunged into sudden, chaotic darkness. A muffled explosion followed by the distant clang of metal resonated from a far corner of the building. Shouts erupted, chairs overturned, and the once orderly gathering dissolved into a panicked stampede. "The police!" I heard someone cry. "Lestrade's handiwork, I presume," Holmes muttered, without a hint of surprise. "Expected, yet perfectly timed. He has a habit of arriving precisely when the curtain is about to fall." Amidst the pandemonium, Holmes, with a rare burst of urgency, grabbed my arm. "Quickly, Watson, before our curator vanishes into the gloom." We pushed our way through the terrified crowd, stumbling over abandoned briefcases and discarded cloaks. The air grew thick with dust and the acrid smell of burnt wiring. Through the chaos, I caught another glimpse of the curator. He was moving with surprising agility, not towards the main entrance, but towards a barely visible side door, near where the explosion had occurred. He had clearly anticipated such an eventuality. As we neared the Serpent's embrace, still faintly glowing with the projected image, a large, burly figure burst out of the darkness, lunging towards the painting. It was one of Lestrade's constables, clearly intending to secure the primary evidence. But just as he reached out, a figure in the swirling dust, moving with the speed of a serpent striking, appeared from nowhere. It was the curator. He did not attempt to seize the painting. Instead, with a swift, powerful kick, he sent the easel tumbling, the Serpent's embrace crashing to the ground amidst splintering wood and shattered glass. The projected image of Niccolò d'Amalfi vanished instantly. "You fool!" Holmes bellowed, horrified at the destruction of what was clearly a crucial piece of evidence, even if it was a forgery. The curator, without a backward glance, slipped through the side door, vanishing into the impenetrable fog of the London night. "He destroyed the mechanism, Watson!" Holmes exclaimed, kneeling beside the shattered remains of the easel and painting, his voice laced with frustration. Not the canvas itself, but the intricate device that allowed the image to be projected. That was the true secret, the adjustment Finch was so obsessed with. It wasn't about forgery alone, but about revealing a hidden truth embedded within the art itself. Lestrade, his face smudged with soot, appeared moments later, barking orders to his constables. "All right, clear the building, secure any evidence, and find that red-headed scoundrel." He caught sight of Holmes amidst the wreckage. "Holmes, what in thunderation happened here?" "A most unfortunate incident, Inspector," Holmes replied, carefully examining a shard of the broken frame. "Your timely, if somewhat heavy-handed, intervention led to the destruction of the very key to Finch's murder. The painting was not merely a forgery, Lestrade. It was a projection screen, and the image it showed was that of Niccolò d'Amalfi, the supposed artist, yet his face racked with terror." Lestrade stared blankly. "A projection? What are you on about, Holmes? The painting's smashed! The killer's gone!" "And with him the knowledge of the true nature of the Red Hand's operations," Holmes conceded with a sigh. The Serpent's embrace was not merely a masterpiece to be laundered. It was a demonstration of a sophisticated technology for revealing hidden layers within art. A device Finch was studying, perhaps even replicating, and which the Red Hand could not allow to be exposed. Finch's sketch, the optical illusion notes, he was exploring this very technology. A constable approached Lestrade. "Inspector, we apprehended several individuals attempting to flee, but the main fellow, the one with the fiery red hair, he gave us the slip. Vanished into the fog like a ghost." "Of course he did," Holmes murmured, almost to himself. "A master of concealment, even when his masterpiece lies shattered. But he has made a crucial error. He has confirmed his guilt not by fleeing, but by destroying the evidence that would have exposed his entire modus operandi." Holmes carefully picked up a small, almost imperceptible piece of intricate clockwork from amidst the debris. It was a fragment of a lens, precisely cut and polished, unlike anything I had ever seen. "This, Watson, is a piece of the projection mechanism, simple, yet exquisitely engineered. And it tells us something vital. The Red Hand is not merely an organization of artists and fences. They possess advanced scientific knowledge, perhaps even mechanical engineers in their employ. This is a far more dangerous and sophisticated network than we initially presumed." "So, what now, Holmes?" I asked, looking at the shattered painting and the chaotic scene around us. "Now, my dear Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes once more blazing with intellectual fire, "we have two objectives. First, we must reconstruct this projection mechanism. Its secrets, however fragmented, must be revealed. Second, we must pursue the Red Hand directly. He has shown his hand, quite literally, by destroying the evidence. He believes he has removed the proof of his intricate deceptions, but he has underestimated the tenacity of a mind that thrives on such challenges." He turned to Lestrade. "Inspector, I shall require full access to all seized materials, every scrap of paper. We must find another invitation, another password, another point of entry into their network. For the Red Hand will undoubtedly resurface, and his gallery will reopen. And when it does, we shall be ready." As we left the chaotic scene, stepping back into the chilling embrace of the London fog, a new sense of purpose settled upon us. The fragmented lens in Holmes's hand, the shattered remnants of the Serpent's embrace, and the haunting image of Niccolò d'Amalfi's terrified face were now our guiding stars. The game was afoot, and the hunt for the elusive, red-headed curator had just escalated into a full-blown intellectual war against a shadowy empire of artistic deception. We knew now that the painting was merely a tool, and the true crime was far more intricate than simple forgery. It was a crime of identity, of stolen history, and of a deadly pursuit of hidden truths. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Past. The aftermath of the raid on the Black Market Gallery left our Baker Street lodgings in a state of organised chaos. Inspector Lestrade, true to his word, had dispatched several crates of seized documents and artefacts, transforming our sitting room into a temporary extension of Scotland Yard's evidence room. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and Holmes's most potent pipe tobacco, as he plunged headlong into the meticulous examination of the ill-gotten gains. Holmes, with his usual disregard for creature comforts when a case seized him, was hunched over his chemical table, the fragmented lens from the Serpent's embrace painting illuminated by a single powerful lamp. He manipulated the tiny, intricate piece of clockwork with a delicate precision, his brow furrowed in profound concentration. Around him lay a scattering of optical diagrams, ancient texts on obscure projection techniques, and a magnifying glass of considerable power. "Remarkable, Watson," he murmured, without looking up, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic scratch of his pen on a notepad. "This fragment, though minuscule, speaks volumes. It is not merely a lens for crude magnification, but a precisely ground component designed for a parabolic reflection, capable of projecting an image with astonishing clarity." Finch's sketch, with its notes on optical illusion and enhancement, was not merely speculative. He was studying the very principles embodied in this device. I had immersed myself in the labyrinthine ledgers and decoded correspondence seized from the warehouse. The sheer volume of transactions, the coded names and veiled references, spoke of an art forgery and illicit trade ring of staggering scale and sophistication. The Red Hand was no mere collection of street criminals. It was an empire built on deception and shrouded in impenetrable secrecy. "Holmes," I called out, pushing a particularly thick ledger across the table. "These accounts, They show enormous sums of money moving through shell corporations and foreign banks. It's almost impossible to trace the ultimate beneficiaries, and the scale of the forgeries is breathtaking. Dozens of rediscovered masterpieces, all laundered through this black market gallery. Indeed, Watson, Holmes acknowledged, finally pushing back from his table, rubbing his temples. The financial web is as intricate as the projection mechanism itself, but the red hand has left certain characteristic fingerprints. The consistent use of the same highly specialized pigments in their adjustments, for instance. A particular type of vermilion combined with a rare resin which I have identified through my analysis of the Serpent's embrace fragment. He picked up a small, sealed vial containing a microscopic speck of red paint. This, my dear fellow, is their artistic signature. Every painting they adjust bears this unique chemical imprint. A fatal flaw if one knows where to look. It suggests a single master forger, or at least a highly controlled production process. So the curator, the Red Hand himself, is the forger? I asked. Holmes paused, a thoughtful expression on his face. Perhaps. He certainly has the artistic sensibility, the theatrical flair, and the requisite knowledge. But the scientific sophistication of this projection device, it suggests a mind equally adept in mechanics and optics. A true polymath, a dangerous adversary indeed. Our discussion was interrupted by a sharp rap on the door. Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor, a Dr. Elias Thorne, the elderly gentleman from Bond Street who had witnessed the red-headed man leaving Finch's residence. Dr. Thorne, a spry man despite his years, was ushered in looking rather flustered. "Mr. Holmes, forgive my intrusion, but Inspector Lestrade sent me. He thought you might find my recent discovery pertinent. It relates to our late friend, Mr. Finch." "Pray be seated, Dr. Thorne," Holmes invited, gesturing towards an armchair. "Any information regarding the unfortunate Mr. Finch is of the utmost pertinence at this juncture." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. "Well, you see, Mr. Finch and I shared a common interest in antique books. He had an extensive library, and I a smaller but rather choice collection. Just yesterday, as I was tidying my study, I discovered a volume I did not recognize amongst my own. It was a rather old, unassuming book on Renaissance art, tucked away on a shelf. It bore Mr. Finch's distinctive bookplate inside the cover. He produced a slim, leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age. I presume he must have borrowed it some time ago, perhaps during one of our shared discussions, and accidentally left it amongst my own collection. I confess I was quite forgetful of it myself until now." Holmes took the book, his eyes immediately lighting up. He flipped through the pages with a practiced ease, his fingers tracing the marginalia. "Ah, the Compendium of Lost Masters, Volume 3, The Obscure Florentine and Triestine Schools," Holmes read aloud from the spine. "An obscure, yet fascinating subject. And look here, Watson, marginal notes in Finch's distinctive hand." He opened the book to a page detailing the life and works of Niccolò d'Amalfi. Finch had heavily annotated this section. His notes spoke of d'Amalfi's unusual style, his sudden disappearance from historical records, and a rumour of a final uncatalogued masterpiece. But more intriguing were the dates and names scrawled in the margins, alongside coded references. Trieste, Verona, Contessa della Rovere, and a series of cryptic numbers that seemed to refer to old street addresses. "Contessa della Rovere," Holmes murmured, a new intensity in his voice. The very name mentioned in Finch's decoded letter regarding the problematic provenance of the Serpent's embrace. And Trieste, the city where the painting was supposedly acquired. This is no mere coincidence, Watson. Finch was researching the true history of the painting, and perhaps the tragic fate of its original artist. "But why would he leave this book with Dr. Thorne?" I asked. "Perhaps, Watson, he had intended to return it, but something prevented him," Holmes suggested. "Or perhaps, knowing the danger he was in, he secreted it amongst Dr. Thorne's similar collection, hoping it would be overlooked by his assailants, a subtle breadcrumb for someone to follow should the worst befall him. A desperate final act of a man cornered by a deadly secret." Dr. Thorne, observing Holmes's intense scrutiny of the book, seemed to swell with a quiet pride. "I always said Mr. Finch was a man of peculiar habits, but a good sort for all that." "Indeed, Dr. Thorne, indeed," Holmes replied, already absorbed once more in the book. "Your keen observation and fortunate discovery may prove to be the most crucial piece of evidence in this entire affair. You have done Scotland Yard and indeed the pursuit of justice a signal service." Holmes placed the book on his chemical table, alongside the fragmented lens. "The pieces, Watson, are beginning to align. Finch's paranoia was not unfounded. He was not merely involved in a forgery ring. He was attempting to unravel a deeper mystery surrounding the Serpent's embrace and its true artist, Niccolò d'Amalfi. The projection of d'Amalfi's terrified face was not merely a spiritual imprint. It was a direct message, a cry from the past, embedded within the canvas itself." He picked up the lens fragment once more. "The Red Hand uses sophisticated technology not just for forgery, but for manipulation. The face of d'Amalfi, projected by this device, serves a dual purpose. It lends an air of mystical authenticity to their forgeries, and it also subtly discredits any true provenance by making the artist appear as a ghostly apparition. They are not merely faking art, they are faking history." "So the Red Hand is attempting to rewrite the history of certain masterpieces," I pondered. "Precisely," Holmes affirmed, and Finch stumbled upon this truth. Perhaps he discovered that the Serpent's embrace was not merely adjusted, but was, in fact, a genuine d'Amalfi, which the Red Hand has now corrupted and used as a tool for their larger scheme. The projected image, Watson, is not a ghostly signature from a dead artist. It is a clue, a historical testament. The true nature of d'Amalfi's terror, as depicted by the projection, is paramount. Holmes then turned his attention back to the seized documents from the raid. He sifted through a pile of discarded wrapping paper and packing materials, his fingers moving with almost preternatural speed. "Ah, here we are," he finally exclaimed, pulling out a crumpled, stained shipping label. "This confirms my suspicions. A series of large, heavy crates shipped from a warehouse in Trieste, Italy, addressed to a discreet holding company in London several months ago, coinciding with Finch's acquisition of the Serpent's embrace. And the shipping company, a small, obscure firm notoriously lax in its paperwork, known to facilitate discreet transfers for high-value items." "So the painting originated from Trieste," I noted, "and from a family in Trieste who insisted upon anonymity," Holmes added, recalling Finch's decoded letter. "This points to a deeply buried secret, perhaps a historical crime, connected to the painting's original owner and its journey to London. The Red Hand is not just forging new works, they are unearthing old ones, altering them and rewriting their narratives." He then laid out several photographs, obtained from Scotland Yard, of the apprehended individuals from the raid. "Most of these are mere intermediaries, Watson, buyers, facilitators. But there is one. This man, a notorious art fence known as Silas Croft. He operates a legitimate-seeming antique shop in the Strand, but his true business lies in the disposal of stolen goods and, I now suspect, forgeries. His presence at the auction and his close proximity to the Curator is highly significant." "Do you believe Croft is a member of the Red Hand?" "A key lieutenant at the very least," Holmes replied. "He is too shrewd, too well connected in the underworld to be a mere bystander. He will know the Curator's whereabouts, his methods of operation, and perhaps the full extent of the Red Hand's empire. And he will be our next target." Holmes's plan was audacious. He intended to pay an unscheduled visit to Silas Croft's antique shop under the guise of an interested buyer, to glean information about the Red Hand, and, more importantly, to bait Croft into revealing his true colours. "The key, Watson," Holmes explained, as he meticulously selected a rather obscure volume on medieval heraldry from his own collection, "is to appeal to Croft's avarice and his professional pride. He prides himself on his discretion and his ability to acquire the truly rare. We shall present him with a rare opportunity he cannot refuse, one that will link him irrevocably to Finch's murder and the Red Hand." The following afternoon saw us once more navigating the bustling streets of London. Our destination the labyrinthine alleys of the Strand. Silas Croft's antique shop, Croft's Curios, was a dim, dusty cavern, crammed with an eclectic array of forgotten treasures and dubious artifacts. The air was heavy with the smell of mildew, old wood, and the lingering scent of something vaguely illicit. Silas Croft himself was a man whose appearance perfectly matched his profession, thin, stooped, with sharp, ferret-like eyes that darted nervously about, missing nothing. He emerged from a shadowy corner, wiping his hands on a grimy apron. "Can I assist you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice reedy, his eyes assessing our attire with a practiced gaze. Holmes, assuming the persona of a wealthy, somewhat eccentric collector, gestured vaguely at a chipped porcelain vase. "Indeed, my good man, I am searching for something unique, something with a history, something that perhaps has been, shall we say, misplaced from its rightful home." Croft's eyes sharpened further. "Misplaced, sir? I deal only in legitimate acquisitions." His voice, however, held a subtle tremor of interest. Of course," Holmes waved a dismissive hand, "but there are degrees of legitimacy, are there not, Mr. Croft? And certain pieces of undeniable provenance occasionally find their way into less conventional channels. I am speaking specifically of a piece known as the Serpent's Embrace." At the mention of the painting, Croft's composure visibly wavered. His eyes, usually shifty, now fixed on Holmes with a mixture of suspicion and alarm. I know nothing of such a painting, sir. It is not in my inventory." "Perhaps not, Mr. Croft," Holmes continued, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial tone, "but I have reason to believe you are acquainted with a certain curator, a man of quite striking, shall we say, hair, and that he, and indeed the Red Hand, were involved in a transaction concerning this very painting and the unfortunate demise of Mr. Alistair Finch." Croft's face paled. He glanced nervously towards the front door, then back at Holmes. "You are mistaken, sir. I have no knowledge of any Red Hand or any murder. I am a humble antique dealer." "Humble, perhaps," Holmes countered, his voice now devoid of any pretense, "but not ignorant. We know of the Black Market Gallery, Mr. Croft. We know of the projected images, the adjustments, and the true nature of the Serpent's Embrace. We know Finch was murdered because he discovered too much about your operation, and that the painting held a secret far deeper than mere forgery. A secret connected to the true artist, Niccolò d'Amalfi, and a history you are attempting to erase." Croft began to tremble. You have no proof. These are baseless accusations." "On the contrary, Mr. Croft," Holmes replied, pulling out the small, engraved card with the coiled serpent symbol. "This was found in Mr. Finch's possession. And your name, among others, was found in his private ledger, alongside cryptic references to the Red Hand and Account X, a pattern, Mr. Croft, that leads directly to you." He leaned closer, his voice a chilling whisper. "And the fragment of the projection mechanism found amidst the wreckage of the Serpent's Embrace, the device that revealed the terrified face of Niccolò d'Amalfi. We know of its sophisticated engineering, Mr. Croft. We know that the Red Hand is not just a ring of forgers, but a technologically advanced criminal enterprise. And we know you are a part of it." Croft, trapped, his eyes darting frantically, finally cracked. It's bigger than you think, Mr. Holmes. Much bigger. The Curator, he's just the frontman. The true power lies with the Guild, controlling the flow of art, protecting their secrets." "And what secrets, Mr. Croft?" Holmes pressed, his voice taut with anticipation. "What did Finch discover that cost him his life?" "The Serpent's Embrace," Croft gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a d'Amalfi, not entirely. It's a genuine work, but by another master, a rival of d'Amalfi's, who depicted d'Amalfi himself. Finch discovered that the original painting contained a hidden message, a coded warning from the true artist about d'Amalfi's true identity and his dealings with the Guild. The projection, it was an old technique, revived. It revealed not d'Amalfi, but the face of a man who looked exactly like d'Amalfi, but was not him. A look-alike, a double, used by the Guild to steal d'Amalfi's identity and works. Finch was on the verge of exposing the fact that d'Amalfi was not murdered, but replaced by this double, and his entire life's work appropriated by the Guild. The revelation sent a shiver down my spine. A centuries-old conspiracy of identity theft, artistic appropriation, and murder, all centered on a single painting. "And the true Niccolò d'Amalfi?" Holmes asked, his voice unusually grave. "He disappeared," Croft whispered, "imprisoned by the Guild, his identity stolen, his work claimed by another. The painting was a warning, painted by his colleague, about the deception. Finch found the proof, the original documents, hidden in the frame of another painting Finch had acquired from the same Trieste family, the one in the armchair. So the Red Hand murdered Finch to retrieve those documents from the armchair, not the painting itself," I exclaimed. "Precisely, Watson." Holmes's eyes blazed. "The true prize was the evidence that would expose their centuries-old deception, The Serpent's embrace was merely a diversion, a tool to authenticate their lie about D'Amalfi, while simultaneously mocking his true fate. Just then, a sudden, piercing whistle echoed from the street outside. Croft's eyes widened in terror. "They know! The Red Hand! They've sent word!" Before Holmes or I could react, the back door of the shop burst open, and two burly figures, their faces obscured by dark cloth, lunged into the room. Croft, with a desperate cry, tried to flee, but one of the figures moved with brutal efficiency, striking him with a heavy bludgeon. Croft crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Watson, the side entrance," Holmes commanded, pulling out his revolver. "These men are not here for Croft, they are here for us." We fired, sending one of the assailants sprawling, but the other, moving with surprising speed, hurled a glass vial at the floor. A cloud of thick, acrid smoke instantly filled the antique shop, burning our eyes and lungs. "A diversion!" Holmes coughed, pulling out his handkerchief and pressing it to his face. "They mean to escape, or to incapacitate us. Follow me." We stumbled blindly through the smoke-filled shop, guided only by Holmes's unerring sense of direction and the occasional flash of movement. Through the choking fumes, I saw the other assailant drag the unconscious Croft towards a hidden panel in the wall. He meant to silence him permanently, or spirit him away. Holmes, with a roar of frustration, lunged forward, but it was too late. The assailant, with a final contemptuous glance, activated the panel. It slid open with a low groan, revealing a dark, narrow passage. He dragged Croft through, and the panel slammed shut behind them, leaving us alone in the reeking, smoke-filled shop. When the smoke finally cleared, Croft was gone. The shop was empty, save for the scattered debris of our struggle and the lingering stench of the chemical fumes. "Confound it!" Holmes exclaimed, slamming his fist on a dusty counter. "They have spirited him away. This Red Hand is more ruthless and more resourceful than I had given them credit for. They have silenced our witness, and with him, perhaps, our direct link to the guild." I examined the hidden panel. It was seamlessly integrated into the wall, a masterpiece of concealed craftsmanship. "He's gone, Holmes. What now?" Holmes picked up a single discarded matchbook from the floor. Not an ordinary one, but one bearing a distinctive crest, a stylized red hand clutching a burning torch. "This, Watson, is not from Croft's shop. It is a calling card, a message, and it tells us something vital. They are taking him to their headquarters, to a place where they feel utterly secure. And that, my dear fellow, is where we shall follow." He struck a match, and the tiny flame cast dancing shadows on his grim, determined face. "The game, Watson, is not over. It has merely moved to a new, and far more dangerous, playing field. The Red Hand believes they have silenced their loose end, but they have merely provided us with a direct path to their dark heart." The search for the guild and their shadowy headquarters had now become a race against time, a desperate attempt to rescue Silas Croft before he was permanently silenced, and to finally expose the true mastermind behind the centuries-old conspiracy. The terrifying implications of a society that could rewrite art history, steal identities, and commit murder with such impunity hung heavy in the London air. We were no longer merely hunting for a killer, we were dismantling an empire. Epilogue: The Unmasking and the Aftermath. The chase for Silas Croft led us through a tortuous maze of London's less frequented thoroughfares. The discarded matchbook, bearing the distinctive crest of the Red Hand, was not merely a calling card but a subtle clue, its specific design and the faint scent of a unique blend of tobacco leading Holmes to a derelict wharf on the eastern fringes of the city, a place notorious for its clandestine activities and its labyrinthine network of forgotten tunnels and abandoned warehouses. "They believe this a secure sanctuary, Watson," Holmes observed, as we crouched behind a pile of decaying crates, the biting wind whipping strands of hair across his face. "A place where the tendrils of the law rarely reach, and where their secrets can be buried as deeply as the Thames mud. But they have underestimated the tenacity of a mind that thrives on such obscurity." Our entry into the Red Hand's true headquarters was, fittingly, not through a grand portal, but a disused drainage pipe, barely wide enough to accommodate Holmes's slender frame. We emerged into a vast, subterranean chamber, damp and echoing, illuminated by flickering gaslight. It was a workshop of deception, far grander and more sophisticated than the black market gallery could ever hope to be. Here, under the very foundations of London, lay the heart of the guild. Canvases, some ancient, some freshly stretched, adorned the walls, many bearing the telltale shimmer of the red hand's unique vermilion pigment. Tables were laden with artists' tools, chemical apparatus for aging pigments, and intricate mechanical devices, some clearly related to the projection technology we had witnessed. It was a factory of fabricated history. In the centre of this illicit atelier, bound and gagged to an ornate easel, was Silas Croft, still unconscious but stirring faintly. And standing over him, supervising a team of grim-faced men who meticulously worked on various canvases, was the curator himself, his fiery red hair a startling beacon in the dim light. He was no longer merely a theatrical showman. Here, in his true domain, he exuded an aura of cold, calculating authority. As we emerged from the shadows, Holmes's voice, though calm, cut through the murmuring activity like a honed blade. A fascinating enterprise, Curator. One could almost admire the sheer audacity of it, were it not built upon a foundation of eyes, those keen, intelligent blue eyes, narrowing in a flash of surprise, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating malice. Holmes, I should have known that a lesser mind would merely follow the scent of a common robbery. You are a persistent nuisance. And you, Curator, Holmes countered, stepping fully into the light, my revolver aimed steadily at his chest, are a meticulous artist who made the fatal error of leaving a signature, not on your forgeries, but on the soul of a man you murdered and the evidence you so carelessly discarded. Alistair Finch was a loose end, the curator sneered, his voice devoid of emotion. He grew sentimental, weak. He began to question the integrity of our work. He even attempted to reconstruct one of our projection devices, threatening to expose the secrets of the guild. He became a liability. And the documents hidden in the armchair? Holmes pressed. The true proof of D'Amalfi's fate. The curator's lips curled into a disdainful smile. A minor annoyance, easily dealt with. Finch, in his foolish sentimentality, preserved relics that should have been eradicated centuries ago. He found the true chronicles of Niccolò d'Amalfi, not the artist, but the visionary. A man whose genius the guild sought to control, and when he refused, they replaced him with a compliant double, stealing his identity, his talent, and his legacy. The Serpent's embrace was not painted by Niccolò d'Amalfi, but by his closest confidant, a warning, a cry for justice, subtly embedded within its layers. Our adjustment was simply to reveal the manipulated truth, to authenticate the lie. So the guild is a centuries-old conspiracy? I asked, my mind reeling at the scope of the deception. Indeed, Doctor, the curator replied almost proudly. For generations, the guild has maintained the illusion. We have rewritten art history, preserved certain legacies, and erased others. We are the true curators of culture, the invisible hand guiding the perception of genius. Alistair Finch dared to challenge that control. Just as the curator began to gesture to his men, a sudden, piercing whistle echoed through the subterranean chamber. A signal, no doubt, from an accomplice above ground. It was Inspector Lestrade, true to his word, having followed Holmes's cryptic instructions for a simultaneous raid. Chaos erupted. The curator's men, caught off guard, moved to defend their leader and their illicit workshop. Shots rang out, and the clash of steel against steel filled the damp air. Holmes, with a swiftness that belied his intellectual bearing, lunged forward, disarming one of the henchmen and engaging another in a swift, brutal, hand-to-hand struggle. I, too, found myself embroiled in the fray, my medical training yielding surprisingly effective blows with the butt of my revolver. The curator, however, was a man of cunning. As Lestrade's constables poured into the chamber from above, he seized a small, ornate dagger from a nearby table, a genuine Renaissance piece, ironically, and made a desperate dash towards a hidden passage. He seemed intent on escaping, but not before delivering one final venomous strike. He plunged the dagger into a large, canvas-covered crate near the passage, releasing a cloud of acrid orange gas that instantly filled the immediate area, burning our eyes and lungs. A volatile compound, Watson, Holmes gasped, shielding his face. He means to destroy the evidence, and us with it. Through the choking fumes, I saw the curator disappear into the passage, But Holmes, refusing to let his adversary escape, pressed forward, coughing violently, pursuing him into the gloom. The chase continued through a network of ancient tunnels beneath the city. The air grew thinner, the darkness more profound, broken only by the faint glow of Holmes's bullseye lantern. We heard the curator's hurried footsteps echoing ahead, leading us deeper into the bowels of London. Finally, the passage opened into a narrow, unstable cavern, with the distant rumble of a train passing overhead. The curator stood at the edge of a precipice, a sheer drop into the murky depths of an underground canal. He turned, his face contorted with rage and desperation, illuminated by Holmes's lamp. "You will not stop the guild, Holmes," he shrieked, his voice raw. "Our work is too important. We are the architects of history." "Your history, curator," Holmes retorted, his voice calm despite the perilous surroundings, "is a fabrication. And your art, however skillfully crafted, is a lie. Your reign of deception ends here." With a final defiant glare, the curator sprang, not at us but across the chasm, attempting to grasp a hanging rope that dangled precariously from the ceiling. He was fast, but Holmes was faster. With a snap of his wrist, Holmes threw his lit bullseye lantern, striking the rope. The rope frayed, then snapped, sending the curator plunging into the black water below with a chilling splash. We rushed to the edge. The water, black and still, offered no sign of him. The current, unseen, was undoubtedly swift. "He's gone," I stated, the finality of it echoing in the cavern. "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his face grim. "The serpent has returned to its embrace, swallowed by the darkness from whence it came. A fitting end for a man who manipulated light and shadow for his own nefarious purposes." Lestrade and his constables, having navigated the maze of tunnels, eventually reached us. They secured the subterranean workshop, seizing mountains of forged art, intricate equipment, and ledgers detailing centuries of guild operations. The evidence was overwhelming, exposing a vast conspiracy that had infiltrated the highest echelons of the art world. Silas Croft, though bruised and shaken, made a full recovery. His testimony, combined with the irrefutable evidence Holmes had gathered, led to the swift arrest of numerous individuals connected to the Red Hand and the Guild. The exposure of their centuries-old deception sent shockwaves through the art world, leading to a massive reassessment of countless masterpieces previously thought authentic. The Serpent's embrace, despite its destruction, yielded further secrets. Holmes, with his characteristic ingenuity, managed to reconstruct a portion of the projection mechanism from the fragments. Through meticulous analysis, he determined that the original painting did indeed contain a subtle, encoded message from the true artist, a colleague of Niccolò d'Amalfi, warning of the Guild's machinations and the fate of the real d'Amalfi, who had been imprisoned and replaced by a double. The face projected by the Red Hand was not d'Amalfi himself, but the double, forever mocking the true artist's tragic disappearance. The genuine Niccolò d'Amalfi, however, remained a tragic figure lost to history, his true fate shrouded by the passage of centuries and the meticulous cover-up by the Guild. His stolen identity and appropriated work served as a chilling testament to the lengths to which a secret society would go to control narratives and profit from deception. Life at Baker Street gradually returned to its familiar rhythms. The crates of seized evidence were eventually removed, and the scent of dust and old paper faded, replaced by the comforting aroma of Mrs. Hudson's cooking and Holmes's ever-present pipe tobacco. Yet the echoes of the red-headed auctioneer lingered, a stark reminder of the hidden currents of deception that flowed beneath the surface of polite society. "A most intricate tapestry, Watson," Holmes remarked one evening as we sat by the fire, the gaslight casting long shadows on the walls. "The threads of art, identity, and murder, woven together across centuries. It proves, once again, that the greatest crimes are often not those of brute force, but of subtle intellectual are often hidden in plain sight, within the very fabric of our perceived reality." He paused, a flicker of that familiar, restless energy in his eyes. And the red-headed man, the curator, he was merely a particularly flamboyant piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. A serpent, indeed, in the embrace of a far older, more insidious evil. But for now, Watson, the venom has been neutralized, and the art world, for a time, can breathe a little easier. Thank you so much for listening to our honouring audiobook's original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.